in this next to last chapter, what we're going to look at is the master section. And in particular, I want to talk about the mid-side processing capabilities and the new master rig. But let's go over the section as a whole first to get you oriented. And like a lot of these other windows, you have the option to pull it out and undock it. And of course, you put it back, right there. And if you on any of these floating windows, I don't think we mentioned this before, if you double click the top, it'll fold up into itself and save a little bit of screen space. And then you can bring it back. You can also fold and unfold all of these major sections within it. That's just standard tab handling. And one other thing to mention, this has nothing to do with the master section per se, but in the interest of saving screen space, on an awful lot of these tool tabs over here, you have an options button. And if you call that up, the last entry down here is this customized command bar, which essentially opens up a field chooser. And this allows you to tick and untick the stuff that you want displayed. So if there's stuff here that just doesn't regularly apply to you, you can untick it and buy yourself a little more screen space there. So no other place to discuss that. So now you know. On the master section itself, the basic signal flow is top to bottom. But I want to point out at the very, very top here where it says Untitled, you have the ability to do something in Wavelab that I've not seen done in another workstation, and that is that you can save an entire configuration, master configuration, as a preset. So, for example, this StreamWorks Audio standard CD rendering setup can be loaded, and now the whole thing will configure for that. And in that same vein, another option you have is this reset button, which is going to take you back to the cleared out factory preset that came with Wavelab out of the box. So you don't have to worry about screwing this thing up. You can get in here and play all you want and always hit that reset button and take it back to 0. So then the next section down are effects, and we're going to come back to that. There's a resampling dialog here, which if you turn this on is going to let you set the output sample rate for your material. And if you need something really wacky, you can customize it over there. But we'll leave that off for the moment too. Then you have your master section, which is pretty self-explanatory. I will point out that you have the ability to unlink the faders there if you wanted to do that. And you can always hold Shift and double-click, put them back right at 0. Now this button, the channel monitoring, this little equal sign, you'll see that all over the place. We're coming back to that in a minute. That's absolutely cool stuff. Then at the bottom you have two specialized effect slots. The first for dithering, and it limits you here. It opens a standard plugin chooser, but the only thing that you really have access to is something that's a designated dithering plugin, in this case, the UV22. The playback processing, similarly, this is going to drop an effect in just on the monitor line, so just the feed to your speakers in the control room. It won't affect the audio stream itself. And if you open this up, it's going to really limit you to the encoder checker. And if you've not messed around with this, it's really handy. We'll drop that in. And what this allows you to do is to monitor in real time how your sound is going to, or your song is going to sound after it's encoded or the data compression is applied. And you can do up to 3 at once. So for example, if we come in here and say, let's look at an MP3. We'll take the lowest resolution one we have here, the 128-bit. All right. And I'm just going to start playback of this track called Extra Good. And what we'll do is you can click between listening to the original sound, and then you can hear how it'll sound after it's been encoded in the MP3.
I feel extra good this morning, all because of you. Fall is in the air and there's a sparkle in the dew. We could talk about dark days, but what else is there for us to say except how glad we are that they are through.
Okay, and something else that you can do here is you can go to blind encoding so that you're not tricking yourself out by knowing what you're listening to, and it'll it sort of hides the cards from you, so you can, again, like we talked about earlier, you're checking with your ears more than your eyes. And it's not a real dramatic change there, partially because this encoding has just gotten so good recently. You don't hear a lot, especially after the screen capture and playback on your end and everything else. But that's a really handy time saver because you don't have to output the whole thing as an MP3 and then listen to that and go, that's not what I want. Let's tweak it and try again. Export and render and check and render and check. You can do all that right there with the encoder checker. Take that back out. And then finally at the bottom here, we've got our speaker configuration, and you can bounce between whatever you had set up in the, if you think back to chapter 1, so you have your big monitors, little monitor, your monocube, the 5.1. And if you need to adjust that or check it, click here and it's going to take you right back to the File tab, into the VST connections and the playback section, which is where you have the, you can go through all your different configurations and set up what's playing back through what. So the View tab, open this guy back up. Now, the one thing I want to spend a little time on is this ability to apply effects just to the mid or side channels. So let's come in here and drop in a real basic reverb. And admittedly, you're not hopefully normally doing a lot with reverb by this stage in the process. But this is a RoomWorks SE. It's one of the oldest, most basic reverbs they have. And I'm just going to put this in the stereo mode across the whole mix, and we'll take a listen here.
I feel extra good this morning. How about you?
Okay, and that sounds exactly like you'd expect it to sound. But if we come in and adjust this from the stereo field to applying this just to the mids or just to the sides, given that this is a well-mixed tune where the vocal and drums, the kick drum and stuff are panned dead center, if we drop this onto the side channel, you could add some extra reverb to the overheads and the background instruments without mushing up her voice a whole lot. So let me start in stereo, and then we'll bounce it over to side and back and forth a little bit. You can get a feel for how that works.
I feel extra good this morning, even though I didn't sleep. The sun is warm, the coffee's strong, and your brown eyes are oh so deep. We can run away to anywhere, leave behind our every care, and find a place where we can get some peace.
Okay, just in the interest of demonstration, I'm going to crank this up to a really ridiculous amount so that you can hear the effect.
I feel extra good this morning, even though I didn't sleep.
Okay, so that you get the idea, and you can likewise apply that to the mid too. If you wanted to do something like try to add a little more compression to just the bass or anything else that was, as long as it was coherently mixed and panned in the center, you can get in and work on just that, which is a really handy tool set when you're given something. Typically in a mastering application, you're handed songs that somebody else screwed up, and then they want you to fix it. And this gives you an amazing tool set to do that with. But just to point out again, this mid-side capability is something that's baked into Wavelab. So every plugin that you own now can be utilized in that application, which is just amazing. Similarly, if we come down here to the mastering family and pick out this new master rig, we can get in even closer. And at this point, I'm going to redock that guy. And what master rig really is a suite of processing tools. And you drop them into the rack at the top, and then you adjust them at the bottom, and you can see the effect in the playback in the middle. So if we just click Add Module for a second, we've got dynamics, we've got equalizing, saturation, and even some imaging. And there are two of a lot of these so that you can they're identical. You can have different settings on different modules. So if you wanted to use this one on, say, the mid-side mode and the other one across the stereo bus, you can do that. But they're identical compressors. So if we look at the compressor for a second here, there's a couple of things to consider. This, for one thing, it's multi-band, so that you can come in here and you can focus different sections of this rig on different areas. So if we wanted to try and go after the, say, the kick drum, start playback again and see if we can identify where the kick drum's hanging out. Okay, I think it's down around the 100 hertz area there. And in fact, we can go to our more precise scope up here and take a look.
I feel extra good this morning, all because of you.
Okay, so I think around 148 hertz or so is where the kick drum's centered. So for one thing, you can come in here and narrow this band down to focus very tightly on just, say, the kick drum region. And again, this is going to be a little extreme, but I'll start playback, and just by manipulating the top of this, we can get a lot of gain or a lot of cut on that frequency alone.
I feel extra good this morning, all because of you. Fall is in the air and there's a sparkle in the dew.
Okay, And you can zero in even more tightly by soloing just that band. Okay, that's our guy. So we've got this band of the compressor pretty tightly focused around that. We can even, if we don't need these others, you can even turn those off entirely, so they're focused just on this guy. But we can go even deeper. We can switch this from stereo to mid-side, and now you can boost or cut the mid portion of the spectrum or the side portion independently. And we haven't even gotten down to using the compressor tools yet. So just again, for the sake of argument, let me we'll solo this and go just for the mid section here.
I didn't sleep.
So a normal multiband compressor, you could sneak down here and grab just that frequency range, but you would probably get a lot of the bass guitar too. If the bass is even moved, in this particular example, if the bass is panned even just slightly off center, it's really going to let you get in on just that kick drum and leave everything else alone. Even though it's a fully mixed tune that somebody handed to you, you're basically able to go in there and isolate on just that sonic thing and do whatever you need to it. So you can even turn off the portion of this that you're not using, disable, in this case, the sides. So we're just working with the mids. And then you have a whole choice of, which type of compressor, and the threshold and ratio and side chaining options. Those are all, that's standard compressor stuff. And if you're watching this video in the first place, I think it's safe to say you know how all that works. But very quickly then you can move through. I'm just going to load this thing up for the sake of demonstration. And you have those same kind of capabilities with all of these different modules. So here's a dynamic EQ, which that actually is kind of a unique creature. So this is up top, you've got your standard, click and drag EQ points. But each one of these bands, just like the multiband compressor, you can turn off the ones that you don't want. And then you can split this into a mid-side EQ. So again, if you wanted to tunnel in and say, we need a little bit of high frequency boost on just the side channels. We just want to sparkle up the drum overheads or something. You can do that. Hold down the shift key and change the Q value there. And now we're going to EQ just around the edges and leave the center alone. We can even turn off the mids. And once we're isolate on that side channel EQ, we've got the frequency gain and Q values that we looked at. We can change the type of EQ from shelving to notch and so forth. But what makes a dynamic EQ interesting is this lower set of controls, which are essentially the dynamics sensing section of a compressor. So if you're familiar with compressor lingo, you're always going to set a threshold and a ratio so that it doesn't do anything until the signal crosses over the threshold, and then it's going to gradually apply more and more compression or whatever you have. This is the same idea. If you can, once you get your EQ set, put a dynamic threshold in, and until the signal comes across that line, it's not going to do anything. So not only can you isolate here on, of course, just the drum overhead frequency, and then just in the side channels, then you can say, we only want this to kick in when they're above a certain threshold. So maybe just the cymbal crashes. And what you have then is an ability, if you go back and think of a client conversation where here's the mix and it's perfect, except could you go in and just on the cymbal crashes, brighten those up a little bit? Yes, you can, even though the thing is fully mixed. You can get in there both in terms of time, frequency, and stereo spectrum and go to work on just that component of the sound, which is amazing. The saturator, essentially a distortion device. The same thing. You can change each of these four bands to different modes. You can turn off the ones that you don't. You can change its function and everything else. The flexibility is the real incredible part here. And one thing I would point out on the imager in particular, I'm sorry, let me get the limiter up here. This has a function in it that you would not normally associate with a limiter, and that's the maximizer over here and the harmonics drive section. It's not just doing dynamic squashing here. If you engage the harmonics mode, you can actually increase, add some additional harmonic complexity up here on the second and third harmonics, and that has more of the function of like a BBE sonic maximizer or the old Aphex oral exciters and stuff. So it's actually sprinkling in spice into the harmonic structure. It's the magic better button. But you wouldn't Normally that would be in a module called Exciter or something like that. It's a little bit strange to me that they put it inside the limiter module, but you do have that capability now, which is something WaveLab had lacked previously. And then you also have some transient structure capability, essentially an envelope shaper here, which also doesn't instinctively seem like it should go with a limiter module, but that's what all this is about. And once you have all this stuff set up the way you want it, you can take and copy it from scene to scene. So you're essentially able to do A/B presets. All right, and we'll copy that again. So then you could have stuff configured this way, and if I want to play with that configuration here and this configuration down there, you can pop between those at the touch of a button. So more than just an A/B comparison, I guess A/B/C/D comparison. And of course, everything can be saved as a preset and so forth. But a lot of capability nested within what would otherwise be a pretty bland sounding, it sounds like just a basic mastering tool, and it would be easy to confuse that with something like a dithering plugin, but there's a heck of a lot of creative capability there. And this obviously does have native mid-side support, but remember, just through your channel routing, everything in your inventory now can be applied to a mid-side type application. And like so much of the other stuff that we've looked at throughout this course, the only way you're going to get good at it is to get in there and try it and play with it. But the more you work with it, the more ideas you're going to have about other ways that you can solve problems and do stuff. I can't say enough good things about the mid-side support capability and Master Rig in particular. So enjoy that, and we're going to come back for one last section and look at how to use WaveLab and Cubase together and the collaboration aspects that opens up for you. So we'll meet you right back here in just a moment.